From Convent Station, New Jersey, September 2016. Where the lawns are always cut. I live on a street where the lawns are always cut and green, where the shingled hats and clabbered faces of the houses are all fresh, all clean. Barely a neighbor to be seen, mostly just the wind and sun, moving gently through the trees, on this well-kept country way of daily serenity, comforting continuity. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in to show 199. Coming to you live from New England, from the small town-spackled coast of Rhode Island. This is your poet, illuminator, and guiding spirit in the poetosphere, Colin Goedecke, a voice here and elsewhere for living our days more fully, more lively, more poetically. Last week's broadcast, number 198, was diners, luncheonettes, and soda fountains, those once so abundant features and fixtures of American eating and food culture. Wonderful oases for many back in time, still vivid memories for many today. And while most of the great and true originals have largely vanished with the disappearance of the people who opened and ran them, gave them a heart and soul, I felt them, especially the vintage ones, their golden era, worth appreciating, even for those of us who didn't grow up with them. So I celebrated them tastily on the show, from cake slices of history to spritzes of film, songs, and many anecdotes from listeners about their experiences. Well, this week, small town and village life. The ones that form beautiful layers and threads in the quilts of countries everywhere, part of the vibrant fabric of their larger cultures, identities, values, vitalities, throughout world history and up to present day, including many of our own individual histories, our origin stories, and for some continuing stories, maybe yours. Qualities that are now and still, in my book, worth drawing on. Because their spirit can help us revive or return to or deepen our sense of and sensibility about true community, real neighborliness, from connectedness to helpfulness to respectfulness, especially in these times of so much social fragmenting and isolating, blind eyeing and disrespecting. Also with an encouragement here to us finding, creating, preserving, and supporting all those of them that we can, and their best virtues. So I've communitized, we might say, a show of cultural commentary, poetry, and quotes, anecdotes, inquiry of various kinds to help us explore and discover their value at heart, at root. So let's make our way out to the lanes and drives and main streets, the squares, parks, greens, and avenues, and see where we get to. Let's start with a poem from 1981 by Baron Wurmser of Small Towns. It is not so much gossip that absorbs them as a fondness to be found even in the children for measuring lives, the noting of how many years some wife has outlived her husband and how each of the road commissioner's 4 children quit high school in the middle of the 11th grade and how it was 20 years to the day, they are all addicted to anniversaries, that a black spruce fell on a one-armed man. Comparison is insistent. The father, who is a better shot but not as good a card player as the son. The sister, who writes poems while the other 2 clean house. Here, people want to live to learn who the next president will be, how many games the World Series will go, whether the trains will ever come back. Ceremonious and dutiful to national symbols, too many of the sons die in the wars. The coffins indicate that faraway places exist, that you can die quite forcibly elsewhere. Those who have hoisted themselves up and fled will say that the finitude of small-town life breeds idiocy, that the imagination turns upon itself, chews its substance over and over until it is worse than nothing. The surmises which the metropolis loves to make, the crushes of people whose names you will never know, the expansive gestures made among incoherent buildings, all that is peculiarly urban and self-aware, is lacking. Instead, you have a hodgepodge, legends hovering, dreams that lapse into manias, characters ransacked like cottages in winter. Each random movement would become an event. It is no surprise that every now and then the attentiveness becomes too great and some Hamlet spawns a horror of the first degree, as is to be expected. The emancipé's letters home are blunt. You are all like those vile canning jars, lidded and sealed and put away for endless winter. And yet, it is these towns that dignify the slimmest of lives with a history, remembering even dogs with an earnest pleasure, a rush of anecdote and regret. Thank you, Baron Wormser, for that. New to me, him, and that. Kathy Mangan, The Whistle. You could whistle me home from anywhere in the neighborhood, mating pair of notes, the signal to quit my child's play and run back to our house for supper, or a Saturday trip to the hardware store. Unthrottled, wavering in the upper reaches, your trilled summons traveled farther than our few blocks. I've learned, too, how your heart's radius extends, though its beat has stopped. Still, some days a sudden fear darts through me, whether it's my own city street I hurry across, or at the corner in an unknown town. The high, vacant air arrests me. Where's home? The Whistle, Kathy Mangan, thank you for that. It's from her collection Above the Tree Line. I like that title. Another new one for me. I was thinking, actually, when I reading that now, of my own childhood in a small town, and we'd be out playing, for hours and hours, and after school or on the weekends, and my mother didn't summon us with a whistle, but she had a triangle, sort of like an old Wild West thing, but yeah, it was a triangle, and then we heard that, and that was our sound. All right, well, the paper boy. Thought we definitely had to have one about a paper boy or paper girl. There's a paper girl I know who's listening right now, and she sent us a few notes about her growing up and about that. So we'll come to that shortly. The Paper Boy by Thomas R. Smith. My route lassos the outskirts, the reclusive, the elderly, the rural, the poor who clan in their tar paper islands, the old ginseng hunter, Albert Harm, who strings the, quote, crow's foot to dry over his wood stove. Shy eyes of fenced-in horses follow me down the rutted dirt road. At dusk, I pedal past white birches, breathe the smoke of spring chimneys, my heart working uphill towards someone hungry for word from the world. I am Mercury, bearing news, my wings a single-speed maroon Schwinn bike. I sear my bright path through the twilight to the sick, the housebound, the lonely. Messages delivered, wire basket empty. I part the blue darkness toward supper, confident I've earned this day's appetite, stronger, knowing I'll be needed tomorrow. Delightful. Thomas R. Smith, thank you, from his collection, The Glory. I'm going to have to look that up. Well, from here in my hometown of Westerly, Rhode Island, the home I've made these last 4 years, Westerly by the Sea, October 2023. Hello, neighbor. The courtly old lady, widowed for decades, and her calico cat, who take each afternoon sun together in a chair by their picture window. The newly married couple, starry-eyed, full of love, full of lightness. The next-door family's kids you see skipping off to school, lunchboxes in hand, or flying kites in the park. The middle-aged man who likes to grow roses and play soulful arias from vintage Italian operas. The young woman, freckle-faced, a lass with glasses, quiet as a cloud, who works at the local library and waves at everybody driving or walking by. The neighbor who keeps his front yard neat as a pin, even sweeps his front sidewalk and, without asking, also sweeps yours. People with real names, thoughts, feelings, cares, and dreams, as meaningful as yours. Each of them a weave in the life, the tapestry of the neighborhood. Most of them living their lives as well as they can. From managing their twists and turns to seeking their comforts and joys. All of them appreciating like warm rays of sun any gestures of kindness, any moments of more than passing, passive connection. From a simple, heartful hello to a kind smile or helping hand, or just the comfort of knowing there's a good neighbor, another decent man or woman, dwelling thoughtfully and peaceably nearby. Yes, there's a lot to be said for good neighbors. All right, a sip. And a poem by David Baker, Neighbors in October. All afternoon his tractor pulls a flat wagon with bales to the barn, then back to the waiting chopped field. It trails a feather of smoke. Down the block we bend with the season. Shoes to polish for a big game, storm windows to batten or patch. And how like a field is the whole sky now, that the maples have shed their leaves too. It makes us believers, stationed in groups, leaning on rakes, looking into space. We rub blisters over billows of leaf smoke, or stand alone, bagging gold for the cold days to come. Lovely. Thank you, David Baker. I was happy to find that. Do you remember Lake Wobegon? Where all the women are strong, all the men are good-looking, and all the children are above average. That's from Garrison Keillor's radio show of many, many years running back in time, The Prairie Home Companion. Well, I have a snippet about it from Wikipedia. News from Lake Wobegon. One of the show's best-known features was Keillor's News from Lake Wobegon, a weekly storytelling monologue claiming to be a report from his fictitious hometown of Lake Wobegon. Quote, the little town that time forgot and the decades cannot improve. I always liked listening to this news that would come across. That was my favorite part, the filet mignon of the whole thing. The opening words of the monologue usually did not change. Well, it's been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, Minnesota, my hometown out on the edge of the prairie. Keillor often poked fun at central Minnesota's large Scandinavian American and German American communities, and many of his fictional characters have names that reflect this. The, quote, news from Lake Wobegon did not have a set structure, but featured recurring characters in places such as the Chatterbox Cafe, the Sidetrack Tap, Pastor Ingvist of the Lake Wobegon Lutheran Church, and his successor, Pastor Liz, Father Emil of Our Lady of Perpetual Responsibility. Father Emil of Our Lady of Perpetual Responsibility. That's good. Roman Catholic Church, a parody of Our Mother of Perpetual Help. The Lake Wobegon Whippets, sports teams, various members of the Bunsen and Krebsbach families, and an assortment of nearby, quote, Norwegian bachelor farmers. What a crew. But what a town, right? Even that was made up. That was quite charming. So, yes. Well, speaking of things back in time, this next is a poem of mine. It was inspired by a story from told to me about many different stories, out of which a number of poems came. They were so colorful and indelible in a way to me about his childhood. This Paul Wehner out in Kansas, where he ultimately returned later in his life. I wrote this at the Ansonia Hotel in New York City, February 2017. The Blue Rinse. A poem for Paul Wehner in Kansas. Circa 50s Wichita. Your mother, Gladys, going for her blue rinse at Bertha's beauty shop off Waco. How well you remember the color of her hair and those days of your youth before she left that for lavender, before you left for a wild blue yonder and big life adventures in New York City. Well, good word out to him. Who knows, he might be listening. I haven't talked to him in quite a while. but I hope he is. Well, I also thought of Thornton Wilder's, the writer and playwright, Thornton Wilder, his excellent play, Our Town. Do you know that? It's a 3-act play written by him in 1938. And this is from Wikipedia, described by Edward Albee as, quote, the greatest American play ever written. Well, there you go. It might be. I've read it, and I've also seen it performed, and it's quite marvelous. So I'm recommending it. Presents the fictional American town of Grover's Corners between 1901 and 1913 through the everyday lives of its citizens. He uses meta-theatrical devices, setting the play in the actual theater where it is being performed. The main character is the stage manager of the theater who directly addresses the audience, brings in guest lecturers, fields questions from the audience, and fills in playing some of the roles. It's performed without a set on a mostly bare stage. With few exceptions, the actors mime actions without the use of props. It went on to success on Broadway and received the Pulitzer Prize for Drama, and it still remains quite popular. Yeah, so, Our Town. I also thought of the classic film from the 30s, set in an iconic small town. I've watched it dozens of times. Maybe you have over the decades. It's a Wonderful Life. Well, the reviewer Roger Ebert years back wrote this when Roger was still around. The movie works like a strong and fundamental fable, sort of a, quote, Christmas Carol in reverse. Instead of a mean old man being shown scenes of happiness, we have a hero who plunges into despair. Frank Capra never intended the film to be pigeonholed as a Christmas picture. It was the first movie he made after returning from service in World War II, and he wanted it to be special, a celebration of the lives and dreams of America's ordinary citizens who tried the best they could to do the right thing by themselves and their neighbors. It's not just a heartwarming, quote, message picture. The conclusion of the film makes such an impact that some of the earlier scenes may be overlooked, such as the slapstick comedy of the high school hop where the dance floor opens over a swimming pool and Stewart and Reed accidentally jitterbug right into the water. But they're actually not jitterbugging, they're doing the Charleston. But that's okay, they were dancing. Even the corniest scenes in the movie, those galaxies that wink while the heavens consult on George's fate, work because they are so disarmingly simple. If you hadn't seen it ever or in a while, go see it again. Or see it. And it is a wonderful life, a wonderful story of a wonderful life. Well, I have this poem for my wonderful friend of many decades and fellow New Englander. This is from 2022, Jane Hewson, for her on her 67th birthday. Green Mountaineer. Vermonter, thriving inside the green and gold folds of narrow valleys, sloping mountains, below the steeples of starch-white churches. Communer with its sacred woods, its wordless wonders. Climber of its sky-born peaks, life's sacred heights. Embracer of every joy of living more simply, more closely with the earth, more deeply, daily, from your flowing self, your high-glowing, ever-greening soul. Love out to her, to Jane and her Vermont town. Tony Hoagland has this, Summer in a Small Town. Yes, the young mothers are beautiful, with all the self-acceptance of exhaustion, still dazed from their great outpouring, pushing their strollers along the public river walk. And the day is also beautiful, the replica 19th century paddle wheel perpetually moored at the city wharf with its glassed-in bar and grill for the lunch and cocktail seekers who come for the Mark Twain happy hour, which lasts as long as the Mississippi. This is the kind of town where the rush hour traffic halts to let 3 wild turkeys cross the road. And when the high school music teacher retires after 30 years, the movie marquee says, "Thanks, Mr. Biddleman," and the whole town comes to hear the tuba solos of old students. Summer, when the living is easy and we store up pleasures in our bodies like fat, like Eskimos, for the coming season of privation. All August the Ferris wheel will turn in the little amusement park, and screaming teenage girls will jump into the river with their clothes on right next to the no swimming sign. trying to cool the heat inside the small towns of their bodies, for which they have no words, obedient to the voice inside which tells them, now, steal pleasure. Thank you, Tony Hoagland. Well, here's another one of mine. This is from Morristown, New Jersey, December 2017. This was actually a moment that did happen. Not imagined. But it could have been imagined, but it wasn't. Man meets deer as he steps out his front door. A nonchalant stag standing there on the suburban square of lawn. That causes him to pause, quietly surprised, quietly delighted. It reminds him how close he is to nature. For a moment, their heads up, each holds the other's gaze, until the stag, simply beautiful creature, antlers off to the neighboring lawn to graze on more green. That's a touchstone for me. Maybe a new one for you. Picture that. Sense that. From Greenwich Village, New York, March 2002. And I included this because Greenwich Village is very much like a village unto itself within the metropolis. Down in the village, a woman walks by with a torch of tulips. A brass quintet blows shiny notes through an open window. The top of a tree catches the 1 o'clock sun on West 12th Street, and it's almost spring. And it is almost spring, friends. Certainly in the Northeast, I'm so looking forward to that. Been out daffodil hunting and crocus hunting. Not to catch them, just to see them. Well, I do have questions. Here we are, about small town and village life. I also asked a number of listeners, friends, and other enthusiasts these questions, and we'll share after this what some of them said back in good reply. So, here we go. If you grew up in a village or small town, what did you love about it? Or remember most vividly? Where was it? And what was it called? How did it help form some part of you or shape your later life? If you've always lived in a smaller setting, what has kept you there? My fine friend comes to mind here, who is here, John Tasca, 91 and a half years old, in amazing shape. Beautiful man, has never left or desired to. He has been happy and at home here his entire 91 and a half years. How about that? What do you feel are the best values or virtues of small or smaller communities? If you never lived in one, do you have a desire to or a longing to? And if so, why? If you made the leap from a city to a small or smaller town or village in recent years or farther back, how did it go? Or how is it going as we speak? And how would you describe the key contrast or difference firsthand between the two, having lived both, not just practically, but emotionally? Interested in that. And what is one you visited and were wonderfully affected by? Elsewhere in your own country or in another country? And what touched or captivated you about it? About that place? Maybe it was the people or the connectedness or the friendliness or maybe the patois of the locals. And what's the last new town or village you explored? I'm always encouraging myself and others to explore a new village, a new town, a new place that you haven't been to. Not necessarily far away, but just knock around. Well, here's what some listeners and others relayed to me for the show tonight, to share with you. So I'll give you a couple. This is from Anthony in Nashville, Tennessee. I grew up in Ridgewood, Queens, New York City, from the middle 50s to the end of the 70s. I would have a lot to say about how Ridgewood during that time was really its own village. Everybody knew everybody. All commerce and gossip was local. But my fondest memories of village life was, quote, the incorporated village of Bayville, Long Island. The town has a rich history. The area that was to become the village of Bayville was purchased by the Matinacock Indian tribe long before the American Revolution with permission from the British Crown. It's said that pirates would come ashore and bury treasure in the woods. It played a big role in the era of New York's pre-Hamptons, haunt of the rich and famous. Long Island's Gold Coast even had its own casino. Well, I recommend taking a dive into the history of Long Island. It's cool. My memories is of a summer house, a real Victorian. It was on Library Lane, right across from the first village library. It was first owned by a ship's captain, a little more than an acre, about 4 blocks from the Long Island Sound. My very Italian grandpa, on my mother's side, spent his early years in a small village with the Adriatic Sea as his playground. When his firstborn grandchildren entered the family, me and my cousin, 1955, he announced that, quote, his grandchildren will not grow up in the city. He had lived in, quote, the city since he stepped foot on Ellis Island in the early 1900s. His fondest memories were of his village life. My grandparents had cousins who had a summer bungalow in Bayville, and my mom's family wound up going visiting a lot in the 40s and early 50s. In 55, he purchased the house. Our family ritual, every year, the day that school ended in June, till the day before school started, Monday, Labor Day, we were there. The summer population was, at that, 6 bedrooms, 2 baths, fluctuated constantly. Some weeks it was just my grandparents, me, my mom, and my sisters, and then weeks all the grandchildren, 11, and their moms would share the house. Talk about chaos. The fathers, including mine, were hard at work in the city during the week, so we can swim in the Long Island Sound almost every day, play Man from U.N.C.L.E. or James Bond with my cousins in the backyard. On the weekends with my dad, we'd play miniature golf or jump in the cobalt blue 1963 Pontiac Catalina for a day in nearby Oyster Bay. Every summer we had to go to Teddy Roosevelt's presidential summer home at Sagamore Hill, and after an Italian lemon ice at Bonanza Ice Stand. I can go on, but for now, I will never forget the village of Bayville. Wonderful. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Antonio. He's such a good man and such a faithful listener. He's always listening in. I'm not sure he's here tonight. He's usually here, but he may be. Well, this one more. And I have a couple things of my own to tell you. But another sip. This is from Robin of Westerly. Robin of Westerly, a local friend and neighbor and regular listener. Here she talks about growing up in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. I grew up in a small town, shore town, a place with one traffic light at the corner of Main and Boston Post Road, the only streets paved at the time. I think any place can be a blessing or a curse. Small towns daily limit your perceived experience of a bigger and wider world. Cities can offer the bigger and wider, but can reduce you, in some cases, to being a stranger, depending on your mindset and the number of friends you see on a regular basis. My small-town growing-up experience is filled with lessons I still reflect on 6 decades later. The biggest influence on me learning a sense of small-town community was having a paper route, starting in grammar school. The routes were passed down from my older siblings as they entered high school and caught early morning buses, no longer able to give their time to the commitment. They were big kids now, more important things to be and do. My route had 60 customers who expected their paper between 5 and 6 in the morning, 365 days a year, delivered by bike. The chrome saddlebag basket straddled my back wheel, and depending on the day, I could stuff 20 or more papers into them, then return home for a refill. The Sunday edition was more challenging. Only 10 thick copies could fit, and making multiple trips required extra miles. During the winters, the snow would get so deep and my hands so cold, my legs burning with the effort. The bike was of no use in the white. I had to lash the papers to a sled and pull the entire route of papers around the neighborhood and beyond. I fondly remember the smell of coffee when I cracked a customer's door and threw the paper in, a dog barking, a hand pushing a curtain to the side, or when a customer met me at the door and asked, "Where have you been? You're running late," or a special gift and tip at the holidays. Small acts of appreciation for my dedication. I began to understand their expectation of my arrival was somehow important Perhaps they couldn't start their day without completing a ritual of slowly turning pages at a kitchen table before work, or they needed to review a weather report for safer travel, or perhaps it was just the predictability of my arrival that gave them comfort. Whatever the magic of those days in the deep quiet, I learned accountability early, that I was needed, that there were additional rewards beyond a generous tip. People were counting on me. People were watching me grow up. We needed each other. We were counting on an unspoken interplay of showing up for each other. We were one, quote, small town, breathing our lives together. Thank you, Rob. That's just beautiful. Just beautiful. Thank you. Well, I've had a lifetime of my own experiences in small towns and villages. I did spend many decades living in New York in my adult life, but I had a place at a small town out by the seashore. I'll mention that to you if you don't know, apropos of our theme, and of course all the places I would travel to see friends or travel abroad. And I especially love being out of big cities and into villages and smaller towns. Well, from the one I grew up in, which was in New Jersey, was Short Hills, where I had a wonderful, safe, and well-sheltered childhood, where everyone on the street knew and looked out for each other, and I felt looked out for. And everybody cared for the well-being of the street and the town, the neighborhood. Including the tiny seashore town that I spent my summers in as a boy, Bay Head, New Jersey, just 1 mile square. Very intimate. I can still close my eyes and remember it. On to the seaside village on the South Fork of Long Island, where I had a summer home for years in the beautiful and beautifully kept village of East Hampton. To the old colonial American town of Morristown, where I spent time years back, that had a resonance both historic and very human. And lots of nature. A lot of nature, including a walled-in pond just a short walk away where I'd spent a lot of time then. And on to, pockets of New York. I mentioned earlier the poem from the village, from the West Village to, pockets like that. And then also to the upper west side, rather, on Central Park West, where I lived for decades, to down to Chelsea, to Cobble Hill, Brooklyn, where I did many poet and residencies that were like villages. They were unto themselves. As E.B. White, you may know his splendid book, Here is New York, from the 1940s, where he said New York was really hundreds of distinct neighborhoods stitched together. And you know what? If you've lived there, you know that that's true. Maybe a little less so now in the last years, but it certainly was true when I was there. And yes, on to the many memorable villages and towns I stayed in, from Maine to South Carolina to California to Washington State, Port Townsend one in particular. Wonderful, wonderful old town on the Olympic Peninsula. And down in Mexico, where I would go, and over in England and across Europe. And the last years to the town of Westerly on the Rhode Island coast here, where I joyfully live and feel a strong sense of place, a spirit of place, much true friendliness. Everyone who comes to visit me remarks on that. Much kindness, neighbors to shopkeepers, and much attention to maintaining an integrity and an identity and a continuity. Absolutely. Well, a few last questions for the moment before we continue on with other things. What ways would you say the thriving ones today, or ones that thrive back in time, might serve as great models or inspirations for us, for those of us living in big cities or in remote landscapes, or for our larger world, our global village, considering how they have formed and feed color the spirit, the soul of whole countries and cultures? What do you think it takes, no matter where we live, to be beautifully village-minded, village-hearted, actively and sincerely caring for our communities, for their well-being, and each other? If villages and small towns disappeared tomorrow, what would be lost most and not easily replaced or replicated, if at all? And if you could name a small town, a village, what would you name it and why? On we go. I was thinking about all the different sort of the fixtures of most small towns and many villages, except maybe the most rural, the most greatly remote. So, gas stations and barbershops and laundromats and churches and post offices, places like that in the towns. They all have at least one, if not more, maybe an old movie house. Well, this is a poem I wrote back in July of 2013. I was on Central Park West, New York. That's where in the city I was living. The city, as we call, as everybody from New York calls it, the city, as if it's the only city on earth. I always got a kick out of that, people's response to that, but that's what it was. This was for the father of C.H. Eso. "Fill her up," said the long-legged man with the large red mustache when he pulled up to the shiny pump in his big-finned Pontiac. Always a Pontiac man, only an Esso man. Fill her up. He loved saying those words, being at the wheel of his own urbane, suburban life, inside the sealed envelope of his 1950s, 60s self. As peak-capped men filled the yawning tank and nimbly washed the Scarsdale-wide windshield, his wife beside and tow-headed children behind, waiting patiently to drive on. Out to her and to her brother, who's my dear friend and brother to me, Jack. Poet of the Great Plains, Ted Kooser. We can always count on him for things about small-town life, especially from the Midwest. Post office. The wall of identical boxes into which our Aunt Sticky sorted the Daily Mail was at the far end of her dining room, and from the private side looked like a fancy wallpaper upon which peonies pushed through a white wooden trellis, or sometimes like crates of chicken stacked all the way to the ceiling. I'd learned by then, I was a little boy, that a thing can look like one thing on one day and another on another, depending on how you might be feeling. There were times when we were there, having our coffee and sweet rolls, when some woman on the lobby side would, with a click, unlock her box and, leaning down, peer inside to see if she had mail, and see us at the table. Mother and father, my sister and I, and our postmistress aunt, and call out, "Yoo-hoo, Sticky, I see you have company," and waggle her fingers, waving hello. Love that. Thank you. Ted Kooser, thank you out there. He's around. That's from his collection, Kindest Regards. What a good soul. When I came out with my debut collection of poetry, The Speed of Sight is the title, I wrote poets that had, I couldn't write the ones, I can only sort of mentally write the ones that weren't alive anymore, but the ones that were, and several of them happened to have been or were poet laureates of the United States, just so happened. But I wrote them with thanks for inspiring me. I sent a copy of the book. I didn't ask for anything else. I didn't need anything. Every single one of them wrote back, including Ted Kooser. I thought that was very neighborly, fellow poet. And so they've continued to inspire me, all of those poets. Carla Houston, Huston, Lip. When my father turned his sousaphone, he fiddled with tubes and oil like when he restored the Model T, his hands working the pipes and joints. And all around him, it's polka, polka, big oompas, little dancing girls on the tips of the valves while he worked his embouchure into the proper purse of lips. Somewhere, bar lights glinted off the big bell, the name, quote, Bob, engraved inside the swale, hill, and valley little dance hall at the end of a corn maze. Small towns in Wisconsin, a fireman's dance in a cavernous hall, a wedding gig or two. He said nothing while he adjusted the weight on knees already bruised and aching. When cancer took a wedge out of his lip, he had to give them up. The beer barrel, the she's too fat, the blue eyes crying in the rain polka, the Lichtensteiner, a Schottische or two. The music lived in his head, the tip of his tongue, the record stacked and dusty on the floor. Thank you, Carla Houston Lip. Yeah, new poet and poem. Love bringing new ones in whenever I can. Wikipedia on village, a clustered human settlement or community larger than a hamlet but smaller than a town, with a population typically ranging from a few hundred to a few thousand. Although villages are often located in rural areas, the term urban village is also applied to certain urban neighborhoods. Villages are normally permanent. In the past, they were a usual form of community for societies that practiced subsistence agriculture and also for some non-agricultural societies. The Industrial Revolution attracted people in larger numbers to work in mills and factories. The concentration caused many villages to grow into towns and cities. If you know your history about that. And National Geographic on villages. In most parts of the world, they're settlements of people clustered around a central point. Most often a church, marketplace, or public space can be an open space, sometimes called a village green, or a developed one like a square, a plaza, piazza. And some are linear settlements. I didn't know sort of about this. They're not clustered around a central space, but around a line, a natural one such as a riverbank or seashore, like a fishing village. Very interesting. Anyway, they have more on that, but I just want to have a lick of that for us. And the village green, also from Wikipedia again. It also provided, and may still provide, an open-air meeting place for the local people, maybe used for public celebrations such as May Day festivities, used as more broadly now to encompass woodland, moorland, sports grounds, buildings, roads, and urban parks. In the United States, the most famous example of a town green is probably the New Haven Green in New Haven, Connecticut. I've actually been there. I did not know that history. New Haven, founded by settlers from England, was the first planned city in the U.S., originally used for grazing livestock, and it dates from the 1630s, is well preserved despite lying at the heart of the city center. How about that? The largest green in the U.S., and I know this one, I didn't know it was the largest until now, is a mile in length and can be found in Lebanon, Connecticut. Well, I have been there often, and I have very dear friends who live in Lebanon right near that green. And it's the only one in the U.S. still used for agriculture. You should visit that if you can sometime. I had some very charming, odd British town names that I found from Mental Floss. Maybe I'll just give you a few because I have other things I want to come to with us. It might take us a little over our usual time. During a drive through Great Britain, the brilliant Liza Danger Gardner noticed something odd about the little towns, their names. While many were pedestrian, some stuck out as suggestive, bizarre, or just a bit off. Presented with minimal comment, here are, well, there are 43. I'm not going to read all 43 of my favorites from a list that she maintains. Upton Snodsbury, Barton and the Beans, Curry Mallet, Throop, Plumpton, No Man's Land, Nether Wallop. I live in Nether Wallop. Climping, Puddletown, Athpuddle, Upper Buckleberry, Mudford Sock. Yes, I live in Mudford Sock. Oh dear. Blubberhouses, Mamble. It sounds like a dessert. I'll have a strawberry mamble. Tedstone Wafer. A breakfast biscuit. Two of those Tedstone wafers with my tea, please. Wetwood, Wet Wang, Papplewick, Queen Camel, and you're going to love the last one, in Fakenham, Norfolk, Great Snoring. How do they keep straight faces when they're saying these things to each other? Yeah, okay. Well, I spoke of towns and villages we encounter, we experience when we're traveling, and we're traveling in our own country, or we're traveling to other countries, other places around the world when we do. Well, I've had many experiences, and with the flavor of the places and the people usually were big part of the flavor, not least the shopkeepers and restaurant owners and so on, and especially in France and Italy, I would say, but also in Germany and other countries I've been to. Well, this was from the south of France, Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat, October 1998. I hadn't seen this poem in a while, and I said, this would be good to share with everybody. It happened at a small cafe, and It's the title is L'oiseau du matin, the morning bird, because it sounded like birdsong what happened here. All right, here it is. Bonjour, monsieur. Bonjour, madame. Café au lait? Ah oui, madame. Et voilà, monsieur. Merci, madame. Bonne journée, monsieur. Bonne journée, madame. Bonne journée. She was like a bird. I should have made me feel like a bird, too. The next is a scene from that I loved in Italy, among so many scenes, indelible scenes. This was in Tuscany. It was one autumn. It was September 1998. It was seeing a grandmother, a nonna, piloting a tiny three-wheeled, it wasn't really a pickup truck, but it like a miniature, like a micro pickup truck, super micro. And they're known there as appes, which is bee, a little bee, a little motorized bee. So the title of this poem, playing off the famous aria, is Nonna e mobile. Three-wheeling through the cobbled piazzas wet with sun, the white-headed nonni putt and sputter tutto il giorno in tiny tin pot parades of appe. Love to the nonni. Yes, yes. Well, childhood memories. I love dipping into those when they fit themes, and they can be, yes, and stay so vivid in us, and joy to recall them. And I wanted to dip a bit more into some with you. You've already maybe been reflecting back on your own childhood memories or earlier days and well-held ones. Well, here are some, not just my own, but some others. I mentioned growing up and the summers I spent in the little town and on the Atlantic, Bay Head, golden times for me, all of them. This was, the poem is The Barber in the Dell, who wore a green plastic visor the color of a ginger ale bottle, who had a raspy voice and a Charles Coburn kind of face, a forever bachelor who wore spectacles he could barely see through, which is why he sometimes clipped your ear with his quicksilver scissors, whose name was the same as the sign on the window by the striped pole, Dell's, whose small, single-story shop and sole chrome and leather chair sat between the shingled houses facing Twilight Lake in the town by the sea where my boyhood summers swam, where my mother brought my young head of sun-blonde hair to be cut now and then by the green-visored old barber in that dell. I never liked going to the barber, but it was quick and sort of fun in a way afterward, all shorn, and back out into playing across the summer. Well, here's one by Kevin Young. Eddie Priest's Barbershop and Notary. Closed Mondays. Is music, is men off early from work, is waiting for the chance at the chair while the eagle claws holes in your pockets, keeping time by the turning of rusty fans, steal flowers with cold breezes, is having nothing better to do than guess at the years of hair matted beneath the soiled caps of drunks, the pain of running a fisted comb through stubborn knots, is the dark, dirty, low-down blues, the tender heads of sons fresh from cornrows, all wonder at losing. Half their height is a mother gathering hair, for good luck, for a soft wig, is the round difficulty of ears, the peach-faced boys asking Eddie to cut in parts and arrows, wanting to have their names read for just a few days, and among thin jazz, is the quick brush of a dun head, the black flood around your feet, grandfathers stopping their games of ivory dominoes just before they reach the boneyard, is winking widowers announcing, "Cut it clean off, I'm through courting and hair only gets in the way," is the final spin of the chair, a reflection of a reflection, that sting of wintergreen tonic on the neck of a sleeping snow-haired man, when you realize it is your turn. You are next. Kevin Young, thank you. That's good. That was good. Very good. All right. Well, here's another poem from a story that my friend Paul Weiner, Kansas friend, told me from one of his reminiscences, one of his probably most significant ones. This is the Hopalong Kid. I have a picture of the Hopalong Kid with two 6-shooters that I concluded with the poem for him. One midwesterly winter back in time, but fresh in mind, when you were on the loose and weren't selling boxes of spud nuts from a wire basket for Mrs. Townsend, you found yourself in town, looking wide-eyed through the window of Levitt's jewelry store, where past the reflections of passing car lights a Santa Claus was making merry. But standing, alone at dusk, gloveless and shivering, in an oversized overcoat, while the Wichita wind whistled up your sleeves, your eyes weren't fixed on old Kris Kringle. Instead, you beheld the most beautiful young lady you had ever seen, brunetely radiant, who saw you too, who soon floated out from the warmth and sparkle, scooped you up next door to Butel's to buy you a hat and gloves, and let you pick whatever your 7-year-old heart desired. You passed up the pairs of Beau Brummely pigskins and fancy rabbit furs for the straight shooters, the hop-along Cassidy ones, with the cuffs and cowboy fringe, feeling less chillier and much happier as you hopped along back home. It's also one of my favorite poems, among others. Donald Heffernan, My Hometown. Oh, Homer, your village sleeps near the Missouri River with your cousin Winnebago, both children of Lakota land. You kept your town at 2 stories, as flat as the surrounding prairie. You taught the Iliad and Odyssey in honor of your namesake poet. Your spirit outlasted the bleached fields of the Depression and bravely swam against the raging Omaha Creek floods. On warm, wet spring Saturday nights, you provided dark places for our young to launch your next generation in pickups, unlighted. Thank you, Donald Heffernan, from his book of poetry, Duets of Motion. Another new one. Patricia Hooper, Sunday Flying. Sometimes after the flight show, when my father flew in formation with the other pilots, diving and somersaulting in his Cessna, he took us up. The crowd was driving off, the windsocks disappeared. We flew above the empty airstrip, past the silver hangar, the ballpark, then the bridge, beyond the school. And then, if there was fuel enough, we flew to Hidden Lake, where just below us Grandpa was fishing in his rowboat, looking up, waving his hat, and Grandma hurried out, wearing her yellow apron. Oh, if only we could go down and fish for perch with Grandpa. But it was nearly sunset, and we flew back over woods and highways toward the town. And finally, there we were, above our block, our house, my Kool-Aid stand, my brother's blue 2-wheeler in the drive. How small it was. How strange it seemed to look down on your life from somewhere else. And suddenly I was sick with loneliness. But we were all together, my brother with my father up in front, Mother beside me in the back, and yet we must be small from there. Our empty yard, the Thompsons on their porch, the Bartons Airedale trying to climb the fence, and Mother's clothesline. My sweater hung to dry. Just then, if I had seen myself on the swing set, I would not have been surprised. Lovely. Thank you, Patricia Hooper, from her collection, Separate Flights, another new one. Okay, I'm going to pass on this, but this is a very good poem. This is one of favorite poet Kenneth Rexroth. It's called Proust's Madeleine, and it's from his collected shorter poems from 1966. This one is, so you can go to thepoetryfoundation.org for that one. But I will give you Carl Sandburg's poem, Band Concert. This goes way back. Band concert, Public Square, Nebraska City. Flowing and circling dresses, summer white dresses, faces, flesh tints flung like sprays of cherry blossoms, and gigglers, God knows gigglers, rivaling the pony whinnies of the livery stable blues. Cowboy rags and colored folks' rags, and boys driving sorrel horses hurl a cornfield laughter at the girls in dresses, summer white dresses. Amid the cornet staccato and the tuba oompa, gigglers, God knows gigglers, daffy with life's razzle-dazzle. Slow good-night melodies and Home Sweet Home, and the snare drummer bookkeeper in a hardware store nods hello to the daughter of a railroad conductor, a giggler, God knows a giggler, and the summer white dresses filter fanwise out of the public square. The crushed strawberries of ice cream soda places, the night wind in cottonwoods and willows, the lattice shadows of doorsteps and porches. These know more of the story. Thank you, Carl Sandburg. I'd never read that before. We are definitely going to go a bit over here. If you want to stay with me, you can. I just think we ought to carry on. I have too many good things, but I'll do some editing too as we go. From Life and Whim, WHIM.com, you might want to read this piece about reasons a small-town lifestyle can make you happier, but I'm not going to have time to share it. But he's talking about, they're both talking, this couple talking about people flocking to small towns, they mention a book, Happier, by the Harvard lecturer Tal Ben-Shahar, who defines the, quote, arrival fallacy corollary to the concept of hedonic adaptation. It's the false belief that reaching a valued destination can sustain happiness. But it turns out that small towns, as they write, can enable happiness because they had both experiences. They talked about things like simpler everyday moments, teaching you to be more grateful, fewer expenses, more time, where you work to live instead of living to work, more nature, more connection. It's like the difference between a networking event and a dinner party. More community spirit, greater focus on experiences over things. And at the end of this piece, they say, have you, like us, fantasized about what life would be like in a small town? Life is short and you only get one shot at it, so don't let fear stop you from finding the place and crafting the lifestyle that will bring you happiness. As Seth Godin has said, instead of wondering when your next vacation is, maybe you should set up a life you don't need to escape from. Very good. Like that. All right, there's another poem I'm pointing you to by, it's Sydney, with a S-Y-D-N-E-Y, Hamilton, New Carolina City. Save that for another time. But I'd love to have another Ted Kooser poem for us. Porch Swing in September. The porch swing hangs fixed in a morning sun that bleaches its gray slats, its flowered cushion whose flowers have faded, like those of summer. And a small brown spider has hung out her web on a line between porch post and chain so that no one may swing without breaking it. She is saying it's time that the swinging were done with, time that the creaking and pinging and popping that sang through the ceiling were past. Time now for the soft vibrations of moths, the wasp tapping each board for an entrance, the cool dewdrops to brush from her work every morning, one world at a time. Wonderful. Thank you, Ted Kooser. Another poem to point you to, go to poetryfoundation.org. Marianne with A-N-N-E, M-A-R-I-A-N-N-E, Chan, C-H-A-N, Painting Biddle City. I like that. But another time. David Spangler said, some people think they are in community, but they are only in proximity. True community requires commitment and openness. It's a willingness to extend yourself to encounter and know the other. Good quote. The Maine poet Wesley McNair, small towns are passing. Small towns are passing into the rear view mirrors of our cars. The white houses are moving away, wrapping trees around themselves, and stores are taking their gas pumps down the street backwards. Just like that, whole families picnic on their lawns tilt over the hill, and kids on bikes ride toward us off the horizon, leaving no trace of where they have gone. Signs turn back and start after them. Packs of mailboxes, like dogs, chase them around corner after corner. Thank you, Wesley McNair. Donald Hall, Christmas Eve in Whitneyville. December and the closing of the year. The momentary carolers complete their Christmas Eves and quickly disappear into their houses on each lighted street. Each car is put away in each garage. Each husband home from work to celebrate has closed his house around him like a cage and wedged the tree until the tree stood straight. Tonight you lie in Whitneyville again, near where you lived and near the woods or farms which Eli Whitney settled with the men who worked at mass-producing firearms. The main street, which was nothing after all except a school, a stable, and 2 stores, was improvised and individual, picking its way alone among the wars. Now Whitneyville is like the other places, ranch houses stretching flat beyond the square, same stores and movies, same composite faces speaking the language of the public air. Old houses of brown shingle still surround this graveyard where you wept when you were 10 and helped to set a coffin in the ground. You left a friend from school behind you then, and now return, a man of 52. Talk to the boy. Tell him about the years when Whitneyville quadrupled and how you and all his friends went on to make careers. had cars as long as hay racks, boarded planes for Rome or Paris, where the pace was slow, and took the time to think how yearly gains, profit, and volume made the business grow. The things I had to miss, you said last week, or thought I had to, take my breath away. You propped yourself on pillows where your cheek was hollow, stubbled lightly with new gray. This love is jail, another sets us free. Tonight the houses and their noise distort the thin rewards of solidarity. The houses lean together for support. The noises fail, and lights go upstairs. The men and women are undressing now to go to sleep. They put their clothes on chairs to take them up again. I think of how all over Whitneyville, when midnight comes, they lie together and are quieted, to sleep as children sleep, who suck their thumbs, cramped in the narrow rumple of each bed. They will not have unpleasant thoughts tonight. They make their houses jails, and they will take no risk of freedom for the appetite, or knowledge of it when they are awake. The lights go out, and it is Christmas Day. The stones are white, the grass is black and deep. I will go back and leave you here to stay, where the dark houses harden into sleep. Donald Hall, thank you. Pointing you to an article from sociallifeproject.org, What Happened to Small Town Life and How to Recapture It. It's by a couple, Fred Kent and Kathy Madden, and they spent some years on a journey to rediscover the small towns and cities in New England. It's a good piece. And they said the real treasure is that in the small towns that created their own identity starting more than a century ago, they're coming back with a renewed interest in small town living. Yeah, so that's worthwhile. All right, coming toward our last musings and sharings for this week and time together. This is a Maya Angelou poem I did not know. Human family. I note the obvious differences in the human family. Some of us are serious, some thrive on comedy. Some declare their lives are lived as true profundity, and others claim they really live the real reality. The variety of our skin tones can confuse, bemuse, delight, brown and pink and beige and purple, tan and blue and white. I've sailed upon the 7 seas and stopped in every land. I've seen the wonders of the world, not yet one common man. I know 10,000 women called Jane and Mary Jane, but I've not seen any two who really were the same. Mirror twins are different, although their features jibe, and lovers think quite different thoughts while lying side by side. We love and lose in China, we weep on England's moors and laugh and moan in Guinea and thrive on Spanish shores. We seek success in Finland, and are born and die in Maine. In minor ways we differ. In major, we're the same. I note the obvious differences between each sort and type, but we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. Thank you, Maya Angelou. I did speak of the global village, and maybe we think we could think of ourselves as microcosmically microcosms of that macrocosm. Yeah, and what relationship we have as global villagers. I think it's a good question for us to ask. Robert F. Kennedy, President Kennedy, back in time said, "It's not more bigness that should be our goal. We must attempt rather to bring people back to the warmth of community, to the worth of individual effort and responsibility, and of individuals working together as a community to better their lives and their children's future." So maybe, friends, if we get it right, microcosmically, we get it right macrocosmically. Yes. Robert Bly, driving toward the Lac Qui Parle River. I'm driving. It is dusk. Minnesota. The stubble field catches the last growth of sun. The soybeans are breathing on all sides. Old men are sitting before their houses on car seats in the small towns. I am happy. The moon rising above the turkey sheds. The small world of the car plunges through the deep fields of the night on the road from Wilmar to Milan. This solitude covered with iron moves through the fields of night, penetrated by the noise of crickets. Nearly to Milan, suddenly a small bridge and water kneeling in the moonlight. In small towns, the houses are built right on the ground. The lamplight falls on all fours on the grass. When I reach the river, the full moon covers it. A few people are talking, low, in a boat. Thank you, Robert Bly, from his collection, Silence in the Snowy Field. Another poem to come to another time, Small Town by Thomas Brush. And you can find that at poetryfoundation.org. Yeah, it's a good one. Fitting. Rosemary Watola Trummer, Trommer, in the 4th of July parade. Right down the middle of Main Street, the woman with the long red braids and fairy wings strapped to her back rode a unicycle more than 2 times taller than she was, rode it with balance and grace, her arms stretched out as if swimming through gravity, as if embracing space, her smile an invitation to join in her bliss. How simple it is, really, to make of ourselves a gate that swings open to the joy that is. How simple, like tossing candy in a parade, to share the key to the gate. Rudolf Steiner, back at the turn of the 1900s, said, "A healthy social life is found only when, in the mirror of each soul, the whole community finds its reflection, and when, in the whole community, the virtue of each one is living." Let me read that again. A healthy social life is found only when, in the mirror of each soul, the whole community finds its reflection, and when, in the whole community, the virtue of each one is living. Love that. Jean Vanier, Vanier, he wrote, "One of the marvelous things about community is that it enables us to welcome and help people in a way we couldn't as individuals. When we pool our strength and share the work and responsibility, we can welcome many people, even those in deep distress, and perhaps help them find self-confidence and inner healing." Coretta Scott King, "The greatness of a community is most accurately measured by the compassionate actions of its members, a heart of grace, and a soul generated by love." And next to last, a poem by Robert Frost, "A Time to Talk." When a friend calls to me from the road and slows his horse to a meaning walk, I don't stand still and look around on all the hills I haven't hoed and shout from where I am, "What is it?" No, not as there is a time to talk. I thrust my hoe in the mellow ground, blade end up and 5 feet tall, and plod. I go up to the stone wall for a friendly visit. Thank you, Robert Frost. And last for now, till we're together again over these airwaves, is a poem that I composed for this broadcast, this theme. And the title is, "What Community Do You Belong To?" And it starts with a line at the top before it begins, actually. Community, from the Latin communitatem, society, fellowship, friendly community of relations or feelings. What community do you belong to? Is it a community of place, village, town, city, neighborhood? Of wise or modern culture? A community of shared purpose or shared belief? A community of minds or kindred spirits? Of kindness? Of possibility? A fellowship with nature? A kinship with the family of humanity? What community do you bring your best self to, meaningfully commune with, or long to belong to, or desire to create? Thank you again, friends, for leaning in here, for thinking and feeling in, for spending some small town time, some village time together. I'd welcome hearing your experience together. Freely share the show out if you like. I love that when you do, or the whole playlist. It's how others find their way here. And if you greatly enjoyed this broadcast and feel like making a contribution to me, I'd welcome that. It helps me keep creating and presenting all these weekly offerings to engage the mind, the spirit, and the imagination. You can donate easily by Venmo to fivefold, Fivefold, at pipeline.com, or to PayPal, to the same email. Or you can simply mail a check to me to P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891. Or contribute through the Donate tab at thepoetorialist.com. Is there a theme, as I always ask, that you'd like to have a future show about that we haven't gotten to in 199 shows? If so, let me know. Email me, Colin at thepoetosphere.com. Meanwhile, you can hear all the broadcasts online on YouTube, currently, on the Floating Poetry playlist. Ultimately on other leading platforms. Working on that. These broadcasts, by the way, come to you through the Poetosphere, the oasis and community of possibility I'm guiding, which you can explore as a visitor or join as a subscriber. I encourage you to open into the experience of it. And to make joining all the more inviting, I've made month and year-long subscriptions available between now and early April of this year of 2024. Just $118 for everybody instead of $190 for a year when using the code SPRING24, all caps, one word, or $14 for a month instead of $19 when you use the code SPRINGNOW. And thepoetosphere.com, the poetisphere.com, just like it sounds. You might also enjoy a just-released album. It's out on Spotify and all streaming platforms. The title is Oases of Regenesis, Opening to Places of Greater Aliveness. Have a listen at your ease. Let me know how it fills you. Meanwhile, I hope you'll lean in here soon again. Until then, dear listeners, let us toast the best of small town and village life, the spirit and lifeblood it gave, still gives, to each of our countries, and to many of their pleasures that are worth experiencing, and to the best of the values and virtues they embody, worth appreciating, worth adopting, and no less to the global village we all do belong to, and can bring a villager's heart and mindset to. If it takes a village to raise a child, as the saying goes, it takes such a sensibility to raise the collective health and happiness of our world, our shared hometown, Earth. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.